The first lesson for today is comparing fractions with like denominators. If you will recall, a unit fraction tells the number of parts, the number of equal parts in a whole. So a unit fraction would be 1/3. The numerator is 1, and then this whole would be divided into 3 equal parts. The denominator is the key to understanding how many equal parts are in a whole. So for our first example, we will use thirds. And you can see we have the whole represented by the red bar. And then on the top line, we have 1/3 compared to 2/3. Each of these segments are exactly 1/3. They are unit fractions. So to compare, all of our denominators are the same, and we are comparing the numerators because the denominators are like. So 1/3 compared to 2/3. And as you can tell, 1/3 is less than 2/3. The same holds true on our second example. We have the whole here with the red bar. And now we're comparing unit fractions of 1/5. There are 5 parts in this whole. So you can see we have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5. This line represents 3/5. And we are comparing that to 2/5. I think it's somewhat easy and relatively obvious when our denominators are the same. Of course, the numerator with the higher number will be a longer length than the other fraction. So 3/5 compared to 2/5. 3/5 is greater than 2/5. Continuing with that same idea, our next example is with the unit fraction 1/6. And we see our whole that's just there as a representation of how many sixths this whole would be divided into. So we see on the top line, we have 2/6. And this time, we're comparing it with 1, 2, 3, 4/6. Again, it's very clear which of the line segments of fractions is longer. So we can easily say that 2/6 is less than 4/6. Again, you'll note that the denominators are the same. We're comparing the numerators, which is very easy. When the denominators are the same, it's very easy to compare the numerators. Our final example will be with 12ths. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6/12 make up the top line of fractions. The bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/12. The fractions are not a great difference, but it is still a difference. And 6/12 is greater than 5/12. So I think for these examples, when the denominators are the same, it's very easy to just compare the numerators. Now, a concept that's difficult for children is when we compare denominators that are different. So before we think about our lesson, it's first best to get a foundation and understanding of fractions and what the denominator means. So we have a whole by which we can compare our fractions. Next, we have 1/2. you can see that the denominator is 2. This unit fraction says there would be 2 parts that would make a whole, but 1/2 is exactly half of a whole. Our next fraction is 1/3, and you can see that 1/3 is less than half, and because there's a 3 in the denominator position, we would have 3 equal parts to make the whole. Continuing on, the next unit fraction is 1/4. 1/4 is less than 1/3, which is less than 1/2. If we completed the whole, we would have 4 equal parts to make a whole. Same idea with 1/5. The 5 in the denominator position tells us there would be 5 equal parts to make a whole. But we also see that, again, 1/5 is smaller than 1/4. The same holds true for 1/6. 1/6 is smaller than 1/5. There would be 6 equal parts to make a whole. The difficult part for children is they see that this 2 usually is less than a 3, which is less than a 4 and a 5 and a 6. However, with fractions, it's the opposite idea. The opposite is true. So we have 1/2 would be greater than 1/3, and 1/3 is less than 1/2. 1/4 is less than a 1/3. 1/5 is less than a 1/4. 1/6 is less than 1/5. So it's very important for children to stop and focus on the denominators of fractions, because the larger this number, it means actually the smaller the piece. Think if we had a fractional strip that was 1/100th. Think how small that would be in relation to this 1/6. So give yourself some time to think about this, and always when you're working with fractions, consider what the denominator is and what that actually means to the fraction. Our next lesson is comparing fractions that have the same numerator but different denominators. We thought about fractions and how actually a smaller denominator means a larger segment or a larger part. So now let's go ahead and reinforce that idea. So our top line we see is 2/3. Below it, we have 2/4. So when the denominator is larger, the fraction, if the numerators are the same, like we see here with 2 and 2 in the numerator position, when the denominator is actually a smaller number, the parts make up a greater portion of the line. So 2/3 is actually greater than 2/4. Looking at another example, we see 1/2 and 1/4. The numerators are the same, 1, but for our denominator we have 2 and 4. So 1/2, we can see, is also greater than 1/4. It's a little uncomfortable to see a smaller number, or what we perceive as a smaller number, to actually be greater than what we've known as a whole number to be larger. But as we stated before, with fractions, the concept is actually the opposite. It's the farther we're moving away from 0. Let's try just a few more examples, and then we'll finish with this lesson. So again, we have 1, 2, 3, 3 parts. 3 parts on the top line, 3 parts on the bottom line for this fraction. So we have 3/8, and we're comparing that to 3/7. When we have this visual representation, we can clearly see that 3/7 is larger or longer than 3/8. So 3/8 is less than 3/7. It's not a significant difference, but it's still a difference. And our final example today, we will compare 12ths and 11ths. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 12ths. Compared to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 11ths. And I believe you'll notice that the numerators are the same and the denominators are different. So think, when a denominator is smaller, that actually is a greater length or a greater part. So 5 12ths is less than 5 11ths. It'll take some time to get used to this concept with fractions, but with time, patience, and effort, you can become very expert in dealing with fractions and their numerators and their denominators, whether the numerators are the same or different, and whether the denominators are the same or different. Time, patience, practice, effort. That's your key to success.